So we're now recording so that I know everything is working nicely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today and welcome to this Learning Live digital session. As I mentioned a few moments ago, I'm Michael Strawbridge and I'm Global Head of Community here at the LPI, and it's my role today to introduce you to our two guest speakers. First of all, we're joined by Ian Cooke, and Ian has an extensive background in business management, health and safety, and also education. He's an experienced consultant specializing in management systems, incident investigations, and chemical safety. Ian has managed numerous large projects and led consulting and learning design teams to deliver a range of occupational health and safety programs for many large global organizations. We're also joined by Matthew Bewley, and Matthew is the Managing Director of 3B Training and was instrumental in setting up that company back in 2011. Matthew has been involved in the construction industry since he was 18 years old and is associated with industry bodies such as Build UK and the NWCSG. Matthew is passionate about delivering quality training and is a huge advocate for supporting mental health in the workplace. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Ian, I will pass over the virtual microphone to you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. And hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to talk to you today about sort of learning impact and NEBOSH as an exam board and the sorts of things that we get involved in, and hopefully share some of our experiences with you. And then Matthew will sort of follow on from me afterwards. So let's get started. I think the topic, or the key topic for me today, is really learning impact. So it's a term often used across L&D, and I've seen different organisations offering different services that range from learning impact being a survey carried out at the end of a training programme to some more techniques that measure learning and how it affects performance back in the workplace. And that's probably where we're going to go. But I'd like to know what it means for you guys today. So I know you've all been active using the chat today. Could I ask you to comment in the chat box maybe what you think learning impact is for you, what it means for you? As I said, I do see a lot of different definitions used out there, so it'd be interesting to get some feedback.
If you just want to drop it into the chat panel, just make sure that you're sending it to everyone. I can see Christopher has come in straight away as saying competence.
Yeah, competence is an interesting one. I think competence is a combination of a number of factors. It's actually defined, as Matthew will know, in construction law, as skills, knowledge, and ability. So it is defined in law in some areas, but it's the combination of those things, and also the ability to know your limits as well. Competent is also to know what you're not capable of doing. So there's some interesting definitions in health and safety world around competence. But yes, learning impact is a way of measuring competence, isn't it? I think that's the link there that we may, and yes, competence in tasks, Sean saying it as well. I think the link between measuring the impact of learning in the workplace to see if somebody is competent. Yes, people are
responses coming in there, aren't there, from Stephen? Yes, Stephen, positive long-term action, Ken to changing learners' attitude and to improve skills. Influencing performance, behavioural changes post-training. Are they the sorts of things then, Ian, that you were expecting to come in? Any surprises there?
No. I think actually they're pretty, obviously we're an L&D webinar here today, so I've got to expect a lot of experience and knowledge in this room. So there's one there from Simon as well. Learning impact is the successful delivery of the message or material that is required in such a way that is retained and has a positive effect on learning. And I think the retained bit is an important component, because it's that retention or that sort of reinforcement of knowledge over time that really has the impact, isn't it? We don't just go away from the training and forget what we've been taught. So yeah, I think we'll pick up on those. Really good comments. Let's just move on a bit on the slides, because there's some interesting points here. Everyone in this room seems to have some really good answers, but some statistics in a minute will tell us something opposite. I'll show you in just a second. Let's take the definitions as in the purest form. You know, the learning is the acquisition of knowledge or skills through study, experience, or being taught. That's definitely that link to competence piece. And the impact is that marked effect or influence. So together, we want to see learning that affects measurable change in an individual and or organisation. And it's two measures we tend to use at NEBOSH when we're endorsing internal programmes. We want to see what's the learner impact and how do we measure that? And really, what's the organizational impact and how we measure that? So we want to see a performance measure across the business as well, which is possibly why the organization invests in that training in the first place. So I hope that aligns to what people are thinking there and gives us some agreeable definition.
Tim for Dan. Was he not?
Hello.
Has he gone?
Let me just
I
make
don't know.
see who has
I don't know where Dan's gone.
is unmute and is muted. Let me just mute.
No problem.
I think we're okay there now.
Now, this is an interesting point here. Just it may not be possible to attribute impact to the learning alone. In other words, I think one of the complications, as we'll see in a minute, around learning impact is you try and assign too many things, or you try and focus just on the training to say the training has delivered all the impact. But actually, there's many other factors that could have given you the positive outcome. We do want the outcome. So if we get the outcome we want, i.e. reduction in accidents, let's say, in the workplace, then fantastic. But it may not have all been attributed to the learning itself. It could have come from other factors such as trends in society, word of mouth, a collective change in behavior that was kind of connected to the training, but not just down to that. So there are other reasons impact could occur. But as long as we can show the learning had an effect, then we can measure that, then we can say there's been some measurable learning impact, which is what we want to say from our training. And I think that's the point. Let's not overcomplicate it. So let's look at, this is the challenge I was mentioning there, guys. So how many of you guys measure learning impact in the workplace? Please just say we do, or something in the chat. But I would hope most of you are familiar with the Learning and Skills at Work report that the CIPD produce. If you're not, I suggest you really have a read, even if the executive summary is really powerful. But 16% of organizations assess the behavior change of participants by assessing the transfer of learning into the workplace. So if you actually think about that, how many companies spend literally millions of pounds on internal training, and only 16% are assessing the return on investment? I mean, that's, for me, the reason why I'm talking to you today and why I'm so passionate about this, because it should be easier than that to do that. And we should all really be aiming, it should be the other way around. 16%, don't. So if we just take that concept further, learning impact is often seen as complex. That might be why it's only 16% that do. And it often, and this is from experience myself, the simplest reason to perform training might be, people are not following a process, or people's behavioral decisions in safety contexts, they're making incorrect decisions or rush decisions. So it might be a safety behavior piece. When you go away and design the training, include that obvious reason. Include, if you've got a piece of data telling you this is why you need the training, make sure that is absolutely front and center of your training materials, that everyone on that training course knows why the company is doing it. And honestly, I think 90% of the training courses I see from an in-company perspective fail to include that message. They start to include learning outcomes and objectives, and they move away from the core reason why and it's that simple thing sometimes, and that's the measure we want to see. You may only need one or two measures that can show that correlation, but get those right, and that should be embedded throughout the training, right from the beginning, within the training. Show people what you're going to be measuring, let them know they're going to be observed or measured, and then let them see that retention part. So when they go back to do their job, continue to monitor and observe that. And that might mean that line managers need to be involved in these measures, that they can continue to monitor it, which helps with that retention. So to put this into three simple steps of how you can get learning impact into your training more easily. Firstly, what is your opportunity or need? And again, this is something which I am finding lots of companies miss, because they really do get straight into the solution and forget the need. So stick with the need, remember why you're doing it, and then keep that message to heart. So if it is to improve safety behavior, as an example here, okay, there are others there, but if it is, let's just focus on that one. Then when we get to step 2, we want to have a measure that we can actually see. Why do we want to improve that? You probably already have a measure in your business that's telling you your safety behavior is a problem. What was the measure that was telling you that it was a problem? Well, let's continue with that measure. Let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be. Let's not create a new measure that we have to add to the business. Let's keep the measure we have, and then just monitor it after the training to see if there's an improvement. It can be as simple as that. Now, once we've established the need, we've established the measure, the third one then is to decide in the way the content should be delivered, and using different delivery methods to make sure that it's engaging, easy to understand, relevant and really does reflect the challenge. So if the challenge was safety behavior, people need to be looking at how they make decisions. If it's a manual handling type scenario, people probably need to be doing the practical, not in an e-learning type course. So it should be representative or reflective, of the need. And that's why the content is step 3, really. Now align all those 3 things together and you should have a really powerful program. And from experience, I'm backing up CIPD's research. It is the ability to keep these 3 things core to your training, which is why I think only 16% are delivering that learning impact. Certainly from experience, the failure comes from not aligning these 3 things throughout the program and continuing to focus on that after the learning's taken place, that retention point. So it sounds simple, it is simple, but for some reason organizations are not doing it. So again, in the chat boxes, if we're seeing anything here about how, I'd love to hear, please do message me separately if you have examples of where you have done this in your businesses. It doesn't have to be health and safety related, obviously it could be other disciplines, but I would love to hear how some organizations are approaching this. I'm always interested to share innovative approaches on this as well. So just moving on, what are the benefits? I'd like to ask you guys, why do you think these 3 steps and this learning impact is important? Why do we do it? What sort of reasons why do you guys do it in your businesses? Or if you're a consultant or a trainer, why do you take the time to really define the need?
I can just see we've had a question coming from Laura. I'm going to hold that for a minute or 2, Ian. And if we can then come, let me know when you can come back to that, and then we can take that question from Laura. But I want us to get the questions to what you've just posed. Allows training programs to be relevant to the audience, why they're doing it, demonstrate ROI. Stella is saying improve performance. And
I think, Michael, just to answer Laura's question, I think Dolapo is actually answering Laura's question. If you connect the 2 there, and Stella is as well. So I think, thank you, Stella and Dolapo. I agree, they're the points. Laura, to answer your question as well here, because that is the purpose. If we take an L&D manager or a safety director or a business manager that needs some training for their staff, there's a need there. You're going to go to the business and ask for some money to invest in this program. You want to be able to go back to them after that investment and say, this is why we've done it, and here's the performance measure that shows the need, and here's the improvement, the learning impact after the training that shows the improvement. Hence, therefore, we see the return on the investment. So I personally think that is why you would do that. So I hope that kind of makes sense. But back to the measurement, want to see the effect? Yeah, absolutely, Thomas. That's it. So I go back to this. This is why I'm so passionate. It's why I came back to NEBOSH to be involved in this project. It really does stand out in terms of the investment, the value, and also the thing you want to shout about, to say to everyone, look at what we've achieved as a collective group of employees and colleagues. It's a shared challenge. That need is a shared challenge, and let's all try and achieve the benefit. So I've got some on the screen there. There are others. We did have a longer list, but they're the ones I'm confident to say after evidence backs up these. The last one there is an interesting one I'll just pick up on. Insurance companies, underwriters who I have spoken to, have said if you are doing this to this level and you can show reduction in risk, for example, if you're having 2% of your staff involved in slips and trips accidents a year and your learning impact shows a reduction of that from 2 to 1%, you've actually reduced risk in your business. Therefore, you're safer. Therefore, your insurance premiums could be lowered. So there is actual tangible benefits straight away that may offset the cost of some of the training you want to invest in. Okay, moving on. So I think if we just move on to the second part of my presentation here then, is to explain how in-company training can effectively measure learning impact. So a bit more practical. I'm still staying at the strategic side, guys. Matt will go on to some of the examples, but from a strategic point of view, it's as easy as ABC. Now, for some people in the room, they may be familiar with ABC as a technique to improve behavior, because certainly when it comes to health and safety, a big component part of health and safety incidents is human behavior. And if you think about training, learning and development, which we're all involved in, what people tend to say is that affects your knowledge. So the A is antecedents, which I believe is Latin for everything that has gone before. So in your head, you've got knowledge, you've got skills, you've got all the things you grew up with as a child, your moral, your society that you grew up in. Everything influenced you to make you who you are, your subconscious and your conscious, everything in your brain, right? So when you're faced with a decision, all of that stuff in your head helps you make a decision. There's the behavior, go left or go right. Jump off that mountain with a parachute strapped to my back and some snowboard to my feet, or not to jump off that mountain and walk back down. And then the consequence, yeah, I love it. I love snowboarding. I haven't done that, by the way, guys. It's something I would love to do, and it's a risk I would almost take. But anyway, you get the point. Now then, the consequence then is actually seen as the bigger driver to improve behavior. Yet training alone only affects antecedents. So for training to be effective and for learning impact to be effective, you actually have to influence consequence. And I'll explain as a couple of examples here. Many people might know within safety, a lot of the time you have to have disciplinary issues, disciplinary procedures in place to punish people who behave incorrectly when it comes to safety. So that's a negative type approach. But you can have positive reinforcement. So you can reward those that do the correct behavior or celebrate, successes or performance improvements. So it isn't just negative, it can be positive, but either way, the consequence is the more powerful driver of the behavior. Now, if people are familiar with this model, please do research it. It's well established. I've actually developed games based on this, health and safety games, where people are faced with a decision and you can role play in a game the outcome of your decision. And if your character gets injured, there's no actual harm suffered to the learner, but you can see the consequence. And hopefully you get to go through this loop very fast in a game scenario, which is why I'm a big believer in gaming, not just gaming on, say, computers. It could be a game or in a classroom, but exercises and case studies. But that type of case study game scenario where people can actually experience the consequence can be a really powerful learning aid, as I'm sure we're all aware. To move it on just in a safety context, this is where I'd like to ask the audience some questions here. So here is a speed limit sign. In the audience chat, could people have a guess? How many people do you think on the roads stick to that speed limit when they see the sign? What percentage of drivers stick to the speed limit, not just to 60, it could be 30, could be 40, just in principle? How many drivers stick to the speed limit sign when they see the sign? What percentage? Let's see what we've got. I'll see if we get anyone correct. So 90, wow, someone's very faithful in humanity there. Great faith in humans. 75, some high, 10%, Seaberg, that's the closest so far. I'll just give it a second. Fairly low, Kev, yeah. You're certainly under. Oh, Amrit, I was about to give it, but Amrit, you've got it spot on, 12%. Now, this was HSE statistics a few years ago. It could be slightly different, I'll be honest, if data's been updated the last couple of years, but a few years ago, 12% of drivers stick to the speed limit when they see this sign. 12%. Now, you all might think that's quite low, but it's true, isn't it? Let's be honest. You've all stood on the side of a road. You see drivers go past you. If there's a bit of room, they will go over the speed limit. And I think you have to hold your hand up and be honest. Not me. I'm a safety professional. I would never do this. You do sort of creep over it. Interesting. So, okay, next question. How many people stick to the speed limit when they see that sign? 60, close, Sean. Get a bit. 90, close, sir. 80, Stella, spot on. And there's a few people who said 80 there. 80%, according to statistics. I think it's a little bit over 80, actually, if I remember correctly. But give or take, 80% of drivers now follow that. Now, think about that. They're both signs. They're both metal signs on the side of the road. So what's the difference? Can anyone say in the chat room what the difference is? This is like a quiz now, isn't it? I've just turned it into, yeah, consequence, exactly. And a negative consequence, brilliant answer. Negative consequence, not the consequence, right. So just, actually, there's no camera, right? There's just a change in sign. It's just the metal that's changed. But the driver understands now there is a consequence. And look at the compliance change you get. So look, you get my point. If you're delivering training of any sort that you want to have an output, then there has to be some consequence, whether positive or negative, to often get the behavioral change you require. And that behavior might be to follow the training itself, follow the procedure, or follow the rules of, or the law of the land. So To summarize my section here, just to say, there are lots of different measures out there that you can use. A lot of these are free. Certainly at NEBOSH, we don't sort of charge for our consultancy fees. We often just want to help ensure training is effective and reduces harm in the workplace. That's our charitable aim, is to reduce harm in the workplace. The cost for most people is obviously to deliver the training, design the content. So the assessment impacts should be hopefully free or cheap to administer and manage. And you do want to align them to your current monitoring systems in your business to make them effective, or your current consequence stroke disciplinary procedures if needed. But things like peer-to-peer assessments. So having line managers assess workers is a great way to not only get the learner to think, hang on a minute, my manager's going to check me on this, but also to get the line manager to understand their legal duty to supervise. You can use team measures, and make it competitive or make it interesting and reward, again, positive reward for success. There's lots of other data and statistics analysis out there that can do this. I'm sure you're familiar with lots of different tools to measure the performance improvements you might get. Self-assessments, and the one I'll just highlight there is things like individuals can rate themselves against certain criteria, or confidence ratings, the ability to perform a task and how confident they now feel after the training. There's a learner type one. And then obviously there's the expensive types now available in the workplace: gamification, virtual reality, role play, and many more that are now available and becoming more affordable in many ways, because they exist. These engines now exist, and you can often tweak them to your workplace if there aren't ones readily available.
Ian, I don't know if you've seen the question that's just coming from Simon. And Simon, thank you for putting a Q in front. It just makes it much easier to see that is a question. And Simon's just asking, what is your opinion on financial bonuses being given for safety performance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got a thought on that, and it takes a while to explain, so I won't go through it all. But in principle, I've not always been a big fan of some of those because of the difficulty in rolling them out, and often the punishment that might come. And often people hide near misses and incident reporting because they want their bonus. And I do know of a company that had a vehicle accident and they hid it because they wanted their Christmas bonus, which isn't the right attitude when you're looking to improve safety in a business. You want to be honest and open. So I think there's different ways you can reward performance, such as risk reduction. So if you do near miss reporting, things like that, I would always reward people who find the greatest risk. So if you look at near misses, you can calculate the risk or potential it would have had. If you then score that and say to people, hey, someone just spotted a near miss that had the potential for a fatality, then that's congratulations to that person. They've just found something that could have caused serious harm, and we're going to reward that. We don't just want near misses that are small. Line managers need to know that information, but as a business, yeah. So it's a big, yeah, hope that makes sense. But yes, it can be done well, and it can also be done badly, I think.
And there's a supplementary question just coming from Simon as well. Should self-assessment be repeated a few months after that initial training has taken place?
Yes, we do encourage a lot of these measures on the screen here now. We do encourage them to be, the term I've been using a little bit is like campaign learning. So the learning isn't just on one day, it's over a period of time. And those assessments we're looking at here should be drip fed in, and different methods to do it over 3-6 months. I mean, they talk about some behaviors taking up to 2 years to change. That isn't always necessary, but it should be reinforced over a period of time. There'll be people who are better experts than me, I'm sure, on this call about how long they may need to be. But yes, agree, it should definitely be over a period of time. So I think my time is up, guys. I don't want to go over my time too much, so I'm going to pass, and we can do some more questions at the end. I'm going to pass over to Matthew Bewley at 3B, and thank you.
Thanks, Ian. That was great. So from my point of view, carrying on in the same theme that Ian has been talking about, I wanted to look at how do we improve what we do from a training point of view. So, and as Ian said, that we look at consequence. How do we get learners to consider that so they understand that their behavior, particularly from a health and safety point of view, is, you know, can have a grave impact, obviously, if it's considered the wrong behaviour. So from my point of view, my slides, come on, move forward. Let me just hang on, Ian. I need to do that again. That should work now. Yes. So this is something that we look to do from my point of view as a business. So when we operate in the health and safety world, we operate within construction, so it's often high risk. So what we need to do, and I think Laura Regan had mentioned the GUSCI and looking at creating training with an end state in mind, which is absolutely right, and that's what we try to do here. And I'm sure lots of other training providers, and I've noticed there's a few other providers on here as well. But I think before you can deliver any training, there has to be a collaboration between training provider, the client, and the delegate to make that happen. So I wanted to talk through that, and then if obviously people have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So it starts with clarity and actually clarifying what, as a business, you know, you may need. So this will help to clarify what is involved as part of that training. Things like the different types of delivery methods. Is it theory-based? Is there a practical element? Can some of it be done as e-learning? What content needs to be in there? But ultimately looking at why that training is needed in the first place. That then will help and lead to understand, you know, and clarify what impact is required, you know, on the business, you know, what outcomes are you looking for? So the sorts of things that you want to be talking about, now, whether this is with an external provider or internally as departments, is you'll want to understand current statistics. So if we're talking about health and safety, Ian's already mentioned near misses, accidents, it might be behaviour type statistics, it could be sick leave, things like that. But you're going to want to have a look at those and then have a look at what goals you might be able to put in place or KPIs to measure that. And I will appreciate you can't necessarily then align that 100% to training, but you can certainly then start to think about, well, if we delivered this training, it was delivered well, we should start to see a positive impact on the things that we want to see, you know, and hopefully, you know, if you're looking to you know, if you've had an increase in near misses, for instance, and you deliver some specific training around that, you would hope to see that those near misses then obviously reduce. My slides don't seem to want to. There we go. So once you've done that from a client point of view, and you've understood then what the needs are of the business, that's really useful for a training provider, but it's really useful for you, because going back to what Ian was saying about measuring impact, those are the sorts of things that you can take to your senior managers in the business who might be having to sign off the budget on this. So you've got to be able to think about, you can actually measure lots of things when it comes to the training that you might want to have delivered within your organization. The delegate engagement, though, for me is really critical to this, because you might have goals that are apparent for the business, but then there will be individual learning goals that the delegates will need and will want to achieve for themselves. So whether that's their personal CPD, whether that's around performance, those are the sorts of things that will help the delegates themselves be more engaged in the learning and the training that they're about to undertake. The big thing this does, though, once you engage the learners, it helps the training providers to align contact, the delivery methods that we feel or you feel that are the best ways to get the information across. So we talk about retention of learning, and really ultimately, you know, what is the best way to make sure that these learners engage with the training, and then hopefully, if it is looking for improvements in behaviour, you see that sort of later down the line after they've attended the training course. The other thing that it does, if we as a training provider often find that we're speaking to a client, so someone within a health and safety department, and then we're allowed to speak to delegates, let's say on the shop floor, what we can then start to do is align the messages that we get from both parties. And often what we find is the messages are never too different, but they might not be exactly the same. And we have a role to play to make sure that both what the delegates want from training and the client needs from training is aligned. The other thing about this, well, I think this is an important stage, when we're looking to try and measure, the outcome of training, we want to be able to have a positive impact on the learners. And that is much easier when they feel they've been involved in the training in terms of deciding what is going to be involved in that training, how it is delivered, even to a certain extent, maybe even some of the content as well. So then for me, we once we've got that, we should really have an understanding then exactly what a client needs, exactly what the learners and the delegates would want from the course. And then we can start to put a design together, and we can actually start to develop what the training will look like. And as a training provider, I would hope, anybody that you're engaged with now will then start to want to work with the wider teams. So, we might want to work with the HR team, or certainly the health and safety team, or it might be a quality team, or if it's more environmentally based training, the environmental team. For me, that's really important, because we will want to understand what company processes there are, what the history of the company has been. So, for instance, have you been really good at something and then for one reason or another it's dropped off? Or has it always been an issue that, finally needs to be addressed? We'll then look at these processes, look at the company history, look at things like your core values and what it means to work for the organization that we might be engaged with. And we would look to then align these, especially if it's health and safety training, to current legislation to make sure it's in place. I would always look then, whether again it's an external training provider that you are working with, or whether it's internal, I would always expect the person delivering the training and the tutor to be involved in this process and actually bring a level of expertise to the whole sort of design and content with this. So they then are starting to meet some of the teams, maybe even some of the learners, before they're actually going to deliver the training. Hopefully then what you will see is a really rounded process in terms of developing the course that you're going to need. And I think for me, often what I do see, whether it's external or internal training, it's a case of, we need this training. Can we go and put it together? Yes, we can. But then the wider parts of the business and other departments of the business aren't necessarily consulted. So we'll see an impact in a small area of the business, but actually not in others. So I think this is why it's really important to bring all those parties together. Then obviously, hopefully, we're ready then to start delivering training and actually start to see how the delegates respond to this type of, the delivery and the process and the actual course itself. Before rolling out a full training program, I would always advise, again, whether it's working with an external training provider or an internal training provider, is rolling out some sort of pilot course where actually you've got those stakeholders who have helped put the course together, giving you 360 feedback. So you will have people from the senior leadership team of your organization. You may even have people from the training provider, if it is a training provider that you're working with. You would then want some delegates who, are on the shop floor, who might be receiving this training, moving forward. And this really gives you an opportunity then to tweak and change it before you roll out a full program of training. I just wanted to, at this point, for those of you that do work with external providers, just put in the chat box for me, if you've worked with a provider or internally, how many of you, have actually been given an opportunity to run a pilot scheme before you end up running a full program?
And just feel free to drop that into the chat panel. I can see straight away Sam has come back. It said every time. Sean, yes. Yes, all the time. Any others? Yeah. Basil, yes. Tanya,
Perfect.
always try to run a pilot and get the feedback.
feedback.
Excellent. And Steve is saying yes as well. I assume that's what you were expecting or hoping to get back, Matthew.
100%. Yeah, I think from my point of view, without getting that feedback, when you certainly go through the process of designing a course and then you want to link it to learner impact on business and particularly goals you want to measure, those are the sorts of things then that you can ask directly on the back of a pilot scheme. So that's fantastic. Good to hear. So once you've then got that initial feedback, that doesn't stop there, because obviously once you've got it and you've made your tweaks to your course and you want to then start rolling it out as a full program, you're going to want to be able to collect and basically get future course feedback. For me, though, you need to be able to do it in two parts. So, of course, you're going to want to collect delegate feedback on that course. And you're absolutely right. I've just seen in the chat, but feedback is king. It's how we improve. And I think it's something that I've always looked to make sure as a business, we're collecting feedback. Great feedback is lovely, but the constructive feedback is vitally important. So we want to get delegate feedback from the course and how they felt, and are they going to be able to then apply maybe a new way of working or a change of behavior into their workplace. What I mean by getting client feedback from the course, though, is are we starting to see a change in behavior from the learners coming from the course? So you can then directly look at that. Might not always be easy to measure, but you want to be able to see early days, and I'm talking within a few weeks of delivering training, are your line managers been able to see there has been an impact from this training? Because if the learners are telling you one thing, but then they're not actually following that, you need to be able to pick that up. And going back to what Ian was saying about consequence, you've probably not linked the two strong enough. And for me, that's what I would call a feedback loop. So you need to think about what the learner is saying, the feedback from the people who are maybe managing, the operatives on site, or whether that's somebody from health and safety or senior management. So is what the learners sort of feeding back on the course, is that actually happening? And you're seeing that start to change and looking at that loop. And if you find there's a break in that loop, something is going wrong in the delivery of the course. So they've not picked up the consequence fully when receiving that training. Then we can really start to look at impact and reviewing that impact. So looking at, has behavior changed? Are we actually seeing these delegates? And we can start monitoring. And again, going back to whatever your measure is, if we're looking at the amount of sick days that you might have to a certain type of activity. I've been involved with a number of organizations that particularly look at, manual handling operations, and they've had high levels of people with, manual handling injuries. So they've looked for training that has been specific to that. So your impact review and your measure is linked to sick days. So you want to be able to record that before you deliver the training, after, and then through that feedback. So you're able then to feed back to your senior leadership saying, yes, we've seen a reduction because of the training and the things we've changed. So that's what I mean by looking at the statistics after the training has happened. You'll still then want to have a look at, well, has it reached our goal though? And I think often when I work with clients, we will deliver training to them, but they've not always thought about a goal. So have they thought about a percentage of sick leave that they want to reduce down, or have they thought a percentage of near misses that they want to see a reduction in? So we may have seen an impact, but have they hit that goal? And if they haven't hit that goal, what things could we do next time and improve on to make sure that. And I think that's where I agree, feedback is king, particularly constructive feedback, and then we can make those improvements moving forward. So I wanted to talk through 2 examples of 2 different clients that I've worked with personally. The issue for both clients was exactly the same, and it's something that some of you will be fairly familiar with. So, and the issue is with staff or operatives not wearing correct PPE, or in this specific instance, RPE, so respiratory protective equipment. So my advice was to go through and work with them on a collaborative basis, get key stakeholders involved and the learners. So, and really have a whole trial around why they're not wearing RPE in the first place, and what we can do and what training needs to be designed on the back of it. Anyway, the solution was this company decided they didn't really want to engage with us on that basis, but they wanted us to complete some simple tests on RPE as and when delegates were sent to us. So they would turn up to us, we would do a little bit of training on the RPE and how to fit it correctly, and then we would do a test to make sure that was the case. What we found was a lot of delegates, the RPE wasn't suitable for them. There was no real in-depth training of why they were doing this. The clients hadn't really involved the delegates from the start. So basically what happened was the learners just carried on and the issue was never really solved. The result basically was the company was issued with an improvement notice from the HSE. And what it boiled down to was that the delegate that got caught was a delegate who wasn't even creating dust. Okay, but they were working in an area where somebody was, and they then were in, so the company and the individuals involved, the manager of that location was given an improvement notice. What happened? They changed that, and they decided to engage with us in a slightly different way. The second example I want to give was, we worked with a client, exactly the same issue, but we gave advice of what we think we need to do and what we need to look at. And this basically, we then work with them. We work with a collection of their selection of their employees and senior managers to really understand what they wanted to get out of this. We then did a trial basis on various different types of RPE with them, and then we applied the training to the RPE that they selected. They went from a very similar position where learners didn't want to wear RPE, didn't want to wear the PPE that they were supplied with, but now as a result of doing that whole consultancy piece with them before any training was delivered, what we find now is that they more or less have 100% compliance rate with their RPE. And it's because we involve them at the start. So instantly they were able to see a direct impact of that advice and that support and that training that we can give. It wasn't all necessarily down to what we did, but it was the involvement from the client from the start and because of the way they wanted to work. So that was it for me, but I just think hopefully you will find that useful in terms of understanding where a training provider would like to come from. But if there's any questions, for either Ian or myself, feel free to ask away.
Thank you very much indeed. I do have some questions. I've got 3 actually that have come straight to that have been sent directly to me. But if there's anything anyone else would like to pose, then pop them in the chat panel. I'll offer these questions to both of you. Let me just go back. One of the things that I think this was one that Julie mentioned. You said a few moments ago, Matthew, get key stakeholders involved. It's not always easy. As easy as that. Have you got any tips, both of you, for how to engage and keep those stakeholders involved right from the very start?
Yes, and I think for me, what you've got to look at is the risks. So, I'll be honest here. We're a training provider, so we're in business. We've got to make money. We've got to make a living. So if a client approaches us and says, "We want this training. It's off the shelf. Can you deliver it?" If that's how a client wants to engage with us, then that's how we'll work with them. But for me, our mantra is about being world-class and delivering world-class training. And I think just to answer the question, we have two clients when it comes to delivering training. We have the client, you know, and the people maybe who are paying for the training, and then we have the learners. Now, really, if we're going to have the impact that we desire and you really want to make a change, you've got to then be able to engage with the key stakeholders to get their input, or ultimately you could be wasting your money.
I've just seen a question there as well, Michael, from Stella, and I think Delapo also asking a similar one. So I don't know if you want me to pick those up. I'll just sort of say that I think how easy it to apply to different situations, and is the ABC method applicable to soft skills? Yes, absolutely. I mean, from a health and safety area, sorry, because that is sort of my background. If you take DSE, office workers who often look at ergonomic posture and screen time, people's eyesight and musculoskeletal injuries that they suffer as a result, it's a slow injury that takes years to develop. So it might seem low risk and a low risk environment, but actually the consequence of those is sometimes offset. And it's important to remind people of the consequence of slow injuries by educating them through this type of training, because they don't see it. If you're working at height on a scaffolding, you know, if you fall off, you see the outcome, the consequence. If you're sitting in a chair working on a screen for hours a day, week on week, years on year, you don't necessarily know the outcome, or you do know it, but you don't foresee the point at which that affects you. And from talking to physiotherapists, you know, office workers often have worse backs and shoulders than construction workers. So I think it does apply to soft skills in health and safety. It applies to every model. It's just back to that 3 simple steps: what you need, and then how do you measure it? And then you can find the appropriate consequence.
Just on Stella's question, I think if you're finding it difficult to apply it to and develop training around it, particularly soft skills, think of your consequence first and then work backwards. Because sometimes it's easier to think about, well, if this person keeps behaving in this way, this is going to be the result that we get. So how do we change that behavior? What training do we need to put in place to make sure that we don't see that consequence, even if it's not happened yet?
Yeah, I mean, it is something I've come across quite a lot with respiratory. I used to, as I say, we spoke about chemical safety. So something I was involved a lot was with respiratory risk, because I'm not sure if people know on the call here, but there's about 16,000 people a year that die as a result of exposures to chemicals and respiratory dust, from silica to asbestos to various other chemicals, and most of them are respiratory illnesses. And people don't know that because it takes years for those things to take effect. So the consequences offset, or it's a slow injury, or it's not foreseeable. They're the sort of terms you use. You've got to try and make that simple when you're often talking to employees, because you've just got to, I like slow injury, by the way. I think that's a good one, simple message. But you have to make people understand the consequence. So they have, like Matthew mentioned, RPE. You know, how many road workers and construction workers don't wear RPE and could end up with being at risk of silica dust or brick dust, breathing it in over years. So it is similar in a soft skills environment. It's just ergonomics, musculoskeletal, or eyes, or stress, or psychosocial, or biological risk, as we saw with COVID. There is even elements of good hygiene in the workplace. Anyway, I won't digress.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Well, just looking at the clock, we have sort of been beaten by the time. So thank you everyone for your questions. Guys, am I right in thinking that you'd be more than happy if people do have any other questions, that you're more than happy for them to get in touch with you via the contact details on the screen there, if there are any other questions or pressing queries, etc.?
Absolutely, and LinkedIn, and we'll also, NEBOSH will be at Learning Live in September. So if anyone's there and wants to say hello, please do. And I'd love to hear people's stories, so please send them in to me directly or via LinkedIn or any other way.
Well, thanks very much indeed for today's session. I'm just going to stop the recording.